apart from a very small selection of people, nobody was ready for these risks. No one was ready for this entire plane of risk. And the human mind does not naturally, inherently understand entirely new paradigms. It's hard when you don't have experience with these systems to understand exactly how jagged the intelligence is. There is no substitute for the human in the loop. And the human who's in the loop needs to know what they're doing in the loop for the loop to succeed.
On episode 65 of Tool Use, we're joined by Kyle Clark. He's an AI engineer and consultant who's helped several companies through their AI transformation, from small businesses to big enterprises. And today we're going to discuss things to look out for when using AI tools in your personal life, risk mitigations for businesses implementing AI, and how we can make the most of this technology in a safe way. So please enjoy this conversation with Kyle Clark.
Trying to do like a risk assessment and just coming to the realization that our processes and procedures and like our definition of risk even were not necessarily appropriately adapted for this new world that was coming our way. And it was around ChatGPT 3's public release when we had people putting in requests to use it. And then Microsoft Copilot came along and we got a bunch of requests for that. And it was, you didn't get a choice. If you have 365, if you have a certain level of licensing, Copilot, it's just there, right? Microsoft is telling you that this is what you're going to like, whether you like it or not. And so there was an additional licensing level in 365 Copilot that enabled integrations to Outlook and Teams and SharePoint and all of your company's data. And I had concerns around the effective categorization and labeling of data and the permissions within the SharePoint infrastructure, and the idea of giving people a tool that could accidentally surface something they should not be able to see because we weren't inherently ready for something like that. That gave me a lot of pause. And then upon further investigation, I found out about prompt injection and ASCII smuggling attacks through like Outlook. An attacker can send you an email that can have like 0.5 size white font that has a very comprehensive prompt injection. And when you search through Copilot for something where Copilot references that email, it doesn't have to be about that email. If it pulls that email into its context, then if it produces a link, that link can take you where you're supposed to go, but it can also, as a side effect, exfiltrate your account information and session cookies to an attacker who can then use them and your Copilot license to ask Copilot to mimic your writing style and contact the last 10 people that you communicated with about something relative to those conversations and include a link that does the same thing. So basically, I was concerned. I was concerned about the implications of that. And as I investigated and spoke to Microsoft engineers about it, it was one of those things where you assume that because a product is out in the wild and like in the hands of serious companies doing serious business, that it is something that is complete and secure to a reasonable extent. But fundamentally, such things with the current technology cannot be completely secured if you can't ensure the integrity of all of the data that goes into the system, right?
That's actually one thing that really concerns me about the proliferation of these AI web browsers. Comet, Atlas, Strawberry. There's so many coming out, and all of a sudden the entire internet is accessible, and we don't have the mitigation against this.
Yeah. And none of that is covered in the advertising. I mean, they'll say, oh, these have security concerns and don't give it super secret information, but they don't tell you explicitly how easy it is for these things to get hijacked. From a user perspective, it doesn't take you doing something wrong. It doesn't take it necessarily visiting a nefarious website, because legitimate websites can have comments. Comments can have ASCII smuggled prompt injections. And so you have to be entirely confident in the provenance of all of the data that these systems are interacting with if they have access to any of your sensitive information, right? If we're talking about like a general use browser or like a research agent just asking questions that's not connected to sensitive information, sure, go wild, have fun, audit the output, check the links to ensure validity, but you don't have to watch it every second. But any system that has any level of access to sensitive information, you have to be monitoring it very actively to have any kind of confidence that you're not causing yourself great issues down the road.
Yeah, because what's that thing Simon Willison came out with? The lethal trifecta, I believe, where it's like
Yeah.
access to your personal
Yes.
information, access to the web, and like read access for an AI, and it's just like a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. That's what the Outlook thing came down to. And so yeah, same exact thing with the web browsers. I would say a little bit more so with the web browsers because you're going out into the open world. Whereas with Outlook, it's more like things that come to you. Uh, that might change over time, but for now, I think it's slightly less of a concern in coming from Outlook. But yeah, people trust these systems. They trust these companies. Nobody reads the fine print, and everybody is just a little bit jaded to warnings at this point. Everybody's used to signing off on all the permissions all the time. Like some of us are paranoid about cookies and reject them at every opportunity. But I see how the average user interacts with their machines and systems, and they do not have the patience to be auditing things to a sufficient level. And I mean, it's not fair to really blame people for not being fully locked down in these ways because apart from a very small selection of people, nobody was ready for this for these risks. No one was ready for this entire plane of risk. And the human mind does not naturally inherently understand entirely new paradigms without getting some situation that makes them relatable inherently, like accidentally leaking your information to a bad actor. I imagine might be one of those incidents for average folks, but hopefully we can find something to bridge that gap that is less severe.
I know they're working on trying to make it better because I remember when ChatGPT first came out, it was very easy to jailbreak it. Then it got a little more complicated unless you used a different language, in which case they didn't have the proper safeguards in place. And then I forget who it was. They're able to embed instructions within emojis because there were extra characters within just the encoding practice or the encoding protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so much surface area for attack vectors.
Yeah, yeah, it's almost limitless, and you can. It's like the Swiss cheese approach. Every time you can only cover so many things at a time. But the other component to that is is that a lot of organizations with these foundational models they try to address a lot of this through post training for the models themselves. But a lot of those safety controls are really limited by the attention mechanism. And so you'll notice a lot of the jailbreak techniques involve like filling the attention with irrelevant data and then slipping in the override after after so much processing has passed essentially, and ensuring that because it gets lost in the middle, it won't trigger a lot of the safeguards. And that has been a very effective pattern that has lasted across systems and generations of these models. But
Oh man.
it's evolving every day. There's a Elder Plinius is a well-known prompt injector, and he does a lot of very interesting work and releases it to the public. And I know he has a Discord server. It's BASI. I don't know exactly what that stands for, but it's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in what breaks these systems. And that can be very helpful data, not just for protecting them, but also just to better use them yourself. Sometimes you have to bully and gaslight a model into answering a truly harmless question just because you triggered safeguards in some way. because of the sensitivity of the subject.
And before I forget, I just wanted to bring up too. We had an episode with Bobby Chen recently, who is big on the authentication aspect of web
Hmm.
browsing agents or AI agents in general.
Hmm.
And there's still no real solution that's widely accepted. So people are logging into their personal systems. And I remember when I just gave Atlas a spin for about 20 minutes before I deleted it. You have the option to have like stay signed in mode, where just you give it your credentials, and then it is you, and it'll browse with full access to your, whether it's your Gmail or whatever social media account, whatever you decide to log in with. And then it can just run amok on the internet doing research, following arbitrary links with your experience. As companies start implementing AI systems, different tools, different workflows, what are some things that they should look out for in order to do it safely?
It starts with the users, right? The users need to understand the systems that they're interacting with and the limitations of those systems, because the marketing does not represent its capabilities accurately, and most general use does not necessarily help you understand where the fuzzy edges of the limitations are. And so you have to empower your employees to explore the systems and to feel comfortable making mistakes, giving them sandboxes, giving them test beds, and letting them explore the technology and how it interacts with their workflows uh, is going to be just a really critical foundation to ensuring that they're prepared to use it responsibly. I've noticed the customer success information from the different providers has been not keeping pace with the speed of the technological development. So OpenAI's information, for example, they released ChatGPT 5 before they had really training materials for ChatGPT 5. And GPT-5 was such a profoundly different kind of prompting structure and response mechanism. And even the fact that it might engage thinking of its own accord. These are all things that can technically be covered in a blurb, but as a user experience, it's fundamentally different. And if you're not preparing people for these changes, they're going to lose a lot of cycles trying to do the things that used to work with the new technology, and getting frustrated by what seems like failures of the technology, but are in fact just failures of change management. It's the change management, the organizational governance around it, and just making sure that the people feel comfortable using the technology, that they're not going to be replaced. People need to understand. Well, companies need to understand, frankly, that the real value add is the augmentation of your human workforce, not necessarily their replacement. Because even a really good AI agent is going to fall back at some point to human auditors and managers, and the more you construct the systems to enable your humans to do more, the better return you're going to get versus just trying to get an agent that does everything for you.
And I've talked a lot about the importance of human in the loop, as a practice when you're building your systems, but also implementation. Have you seen any products or companies that do this particularly well?
I think Anthropic, specifically with Claude Code, has done a really excellent job in allowing users the freedom to be hands off if they feel they know genuinely what they're doing, but also having a really good baseline of asking for permission, and showing you what it's doing, and telling you what it's doing, and providing a base level of auditability. It's been getting better, I would say, in those ways, but they did have a really strong foundation. I worry that a lot of companies are trying to go the opposite way, where they're trying to give you a screen that's fire and forget, where you just give it a task and it just goes off and does things in the background. And while that can make sense if you have a finely honed process and finely honed agents that know what you want and how it fits into your needs, that can make sense. But for general purpose tools, or in my experience, for AI coding agents, it can be counterproductive, because if you're not following what they're doing at least a little bit as they're doing it, they're much more prone to go far off in the wrong direction. Generally, you want to keep an eye on them. They can run for extended periods of time on their own, and sometimes what they produce is usable when they do that. But almost always, if you know what you're looking for, if you know what you're trying to build, and you're paying attention, you're going to get better results by interrupting them on a semi-regular basis.
Yeah, I know I've never really trusted Claude Code to do YOLO mode. Sometimes you'll fire it up in a sandbox and just kind of experiment and play. But any meaningful work that I've done,
Mm.
I review the code, I review the process, I course correct constantly. Maybe it's my developer background make me want to have the control, but I do feel the due diligence is required. There's just so much potential for it to just like get a signal that sends down the wrong direction, and then it amplifies that signal.
I like to use subagents a lot, especially with Claude Code. Claude Code has done an amazing job implementing both like a general tasking subagent and specialized subagents. And before they even implemented themselves, I was using Claude Code to spin up headless sessions of Claude Code to do things as sort of my own guerrilla subagents. Uh, but then they introduced it like a month and a half later, and the work wasn't wasted because I definitely learned something in the process. But it is an interesting feeling having your work become obsolete within a couple of months. And I guess it's something that we have to get used to in this day and age if we're trying to actually live on the edge with this stuff. But I digress. In terms of subagents, I've gone through a lot of different theories of subagent interaction, and I've definitely found that societies of subagents don't really work for most of the use cases I'm building. It you definitely need a specific hierarchy of like an orchestrator and subagents that report to the orchestrator, because the more you try to divvy up the ultimate responsibility, the more difficulty you get, and the less able you are to keep things cohesive in any meaningful manner. Because as you noted, they'll get a little signal and just go off the deep end.
Do you think the sub agent pattern might be a good mitigation, because the rather than like the entire context window with the risk of pollution, it's almost just like a subset, a fully separated context window. So maybe the blast radius can be isolated.
Well, it's a mitigation, but it also depends on how you're applying them, right? So more is not always better. There's a lot of people who just say throw more compute at it, and but the how is really important in that, because I've tried just blowing it wide by having like 10 subagents review things from different angles, and then have like a meta analysis subagent come through and review their analyses and compile the most relevant things. That 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 is also subject to just the detritus of communication accumulating and weighing down the value of the outputs, right? And it can work if you have a very clear rubric, and the grading and the information that they're generating is very limited in scope, and if it can be amalgamated and analyzed effectively in batches. But if you're asking for like qualitative reviews, and you're asking many subagents to provide qualitative reviews, it's going to be counterproductive past 2 or 3. There's just too many different avenues for exploration in pretty much every vein of interesting research, right? And so the subagents really shine when they have explicit tasks, when you know exactly what you need from them, and you know exactly the shape that they need to deliver it in, and exactly how much context they need to get to do that effectively. It's helpful to have like subagent tasking files. You can build a subagent for every different task, but this is speaking in Claude Code specifically, but those official subagents will take up uh, context, just laying around, just being active. They'll take up context from the context window when they don't necessarily need to. So I will just create Markdown or YAML files that are effectively subagent instructions, and point and just feed that file into the command line and say use this as the subagent to accomplish X, Y task. And that has served me pretty well. I have a
Nice.
colleague who swears by having only one named subagent, and that is Karen. And Karen's job is to review the actions of every other agent and subagent and to see if they meet quality standards, and if not, to report them to management. And he
Classic.
swears by Karen. He says she's been inordinately helpful to him in his development endeavors.
Pivoting away from subagents, though, MCP servers, have you found any patterns or anti-patterns that are common with leveraging MCP in workflows?
I found MCP themselves to almost be an anti-pattern. It's great to have a unifying force, right? It's great to have a standard to rally around, to inspire people, to give them ideas of what can be done with the technology when it's abstract otherwise, right? For all of those reasons, MCP is a boon to this world. In practice, it tends to be much more context than it's worth. There are not many slim MCP servers out there. There are a lot of different solutions that try to manage MCP server bloat and access and tool use and permissions. But right now, it's just too many variables in a package to meaningfully get reliable utility out of it for most situations. Now, of course, certain people with certain limited scope things are going to have MCP servers that make their lives a lot easier. In practice, though, if it's something that you're doing a lot, you could probably design your own tool calls that beat the pants off of any MCP server. But just like anything else, there's a balance between how much time people have to investigate things themselves, build things out themselves, or troubleshoot and maintain the things that they've built, because, it's fair to say that is a lot of overhead. But I would also just note that a lot of that is building the skills and the muscles to better understand these products. So even if you were to use an MCP server later, you would be making better use of that MCP server because you would fundamentally understand how the different layers interact with the models.
It's very important to control what's in your context window. There's also the risk of getting malicious MCP servers where you're just like, hey, browsing the web, this one sounds cool, npm install. And then you really have no idea what tools it's introducing to your system and what access you give it to. Because again, like you said, we just accept every permission that comes our way.
Yeah. Same reason you don't want to just install every package that your coding tool recommends to you, because there's, I don't know if you've covered slop squatting before,
No.
but so there was domain squatting, where people would take domains that could be misspellings or like look similar to other domains and use them for nefarious activities. But bad actors discovered that coding agents were regularly hallucinating the same package names of things that didn't exist. And so they would register package names that kept coming up in hallucinations as malicious tools. And so an enterprising vibe coder who doesn't know exactly what they're looking for with the things that they're creating could be recommended or even just have the package installed on, for them by a coding agent. And then someone's got remote access to their system and, all their Git keys. You got to be careful out there. The internet happens to be a dangerous place. That's always been the case. It's just a different version of dangerous nowadays.
Yeah, because it's almost just like we have a different interface, a different filter, and because it's so new, there's just not the experience as to best practices, and people just get blown away by the magical aspect of AI. We're like, it can do anything. I'm just going to let it continue to do everything.
Yeah, that's actually a really common anti-pattern I've seen just in user level adoption. It's if people have been getting nothing but success in their first few interactions with an AI system, especially if it's like one of the simpler ones, they put it through the first few things that they can think of. And it's hard when you don't have experience with these systems to understand exactly how jagged the intelligence is, and things that seem like they should be very easy for a magical robot brain to understand, like, the number of R's in strawberry is the classic example, can be quite vexing. And because people will get these initial victories that hold up in like these limited explorations, they will think that it just keeps working that well in all the use cases.
And stepping from like the company tier to the personal tier, one example is I like using Obsidian for my notes. I think it's very powerful. Love the idea of having Markdown that I can just pull anywhere, file over app. Love it. I've started running Claude Code in my vault, and it can generate dynamic dashboards for me. It's a ton of fun. I'm cognizant that I don't want to have all of my personal notes in that vault now. I do have a separate personal and work focused one. Do you have any thoughts or best practices around using these coding agents outside of classical coding?
Yeah, I am also a big fan of using them to collect and organize and make sense of your personal information. I use repos myself. I open them with Obsidian, so it's a very similar, probably use pattern uh, from from in terms of consuming what's produced. I find that it's very helpful to organize my information into repos. I also keep them separated into specific subject matters because I generally don't find it productive to have everything accessible from every agent session because otherwise things can get a little bit off topic. I just like to control the different ways things can go wrong, right? And
Nice.
basically, everything you give to an agent is something that it thinks it can use to solve a given problem. And so, for that reason, I try to be very judicious in what I expose to agents uh, that I'm working with because it's not just about the data privacy component of it. It's much more about the cross contamination of data. Context contamination, I guess, would be a better term for it.
And that's one reason I have memory turned off for ChatGPT and Anthropic, because I've seen people where they'll test out like an image gen model, Sora or whatever, and all of a sudden conversations that they've had in the past kind of leak their way through, whether it's like changing the location or changing the vibe of it. And you
Hmm.
just don't know what it's going to pull if you don't control that system.
Same reason I turn off geolocation, because if you're asking it to generate a picture of you, sometimes it'll just create like a sign in the back that's like the city name of where it geolocated you to, and it's like I didn't ask for that. But
Interesting.
it's in the context, so it's relevant according to the model. Right?
And so just following that train of thought, using these state of the art proprietary models, they always have the best performance, but you lose control over like the entire setup. Like we don't know what goes in the context. They always add their own system message. Are you a proponent for open source models, or are they not at the level that they're functional enough for you?
I mean, I like some open source models. It's variable. It's variable, and it's definitely a more cumbersome way to do work for the most part, in that they're not served as conveniently. Or if you're trying to run them locally, you need sufficient hardware to run the level of quantization that you're looking for. You can use open source or open weight models to accomplish a great deal of very productive work. Generally, for the problems that I'm trying to solve, time is one of the more important factors. And so the principle that I work with is prove it out with the big models. And then if you've got the time and it makes economic sense, refine it because you can accomplish insane things through orchestration. If you build a lot of scaffolding, you can squeeze so much horsepower out of tiny models just by being extraordinarily clear and atomic about the context that you give them and the expectations of what you get from them, and then just chain a lot of those interactions into basically an agentic workflow. And there are insane efficiencies to be unlocked there. The the counter argument to that is Richard Sutton's The Bitter Lesson. I'm sure you've heard of it. Uh, Basically, there has never been a cost curve for any product in existence that I'm aware of, like there is for the inference of foundation models. They costs for inference of powerful foundation models are dropping to like 1,000th of what they were within a year. Uh, just because nobody wants the old model after the new model comes out, and everybody's getting better at making their GPUs work harder with less. And so there's efficiencies being gained in every direction. And while it might be a fun project, and I would say it's probably a really productive learning exercise for people who are just trying to get into things. I mean, don't get me wrong, run your own models. If you've got the hardware, if you've got access to it, run your own models. It is a fantastic learning exercise. But if we're talking about trying to productionize it, trying to save real world time and energy, it's usually a better bet to just go with one of the leading foundation models and go from there, frankly.
From the business perspective, we're on the same thing. What would you consider any like heuristics or rules around the build versus buy debate? Because I know some companies don't want to send their data to external systems, external APIs, and some other ones want to fine tune their models. So,
Mhm.
do you have any ideas when people should explore? Just follow your path, use the big ones, get the job done, figure it later, versus bringing everything in house and control it.
I mean, yeah, build versus buy is a whole spectrum, and so it really depends on the people that you've got to work with, right? And their workload and their availability, and how much you can afford to dedicate them towards building building the skills to build these systems out. And that's going to be different for every organization. The one thing that I've seen is that you can build a system that is perfect on paper for exactly what people need to do. And if it doesn't click to the end user how they are supposed to slip this into their day, their standard operating procedure, if that is not painless, then the entire exercise could have been a waste. ChatGPT Enterprise is absolutely worth the value of $40 per user per month. That's 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 just true. But the value that you get out of that is going to depend so much on how you prepare the people that are receiving it to use it most effectively, and how you support them to succeed, and how you make them feel supported. It's important to make sure that you understand your systems before you make that decision. Everybody's systems are going to be different. Everybody's data is different, and there are really compelling solutions that work for 90% of organizations that might be fundamentally unsuitable for you because of some nuance about how your systems work, or even like customer agreements. If you need to be GDPR compliant, that's going to substantially affect like how you're allowed to process what data, depending on who your clientele are. It's good to, if you don't have in-house expertise, it's good to at least start with a consultant. First, get your data and your processes mapped before you do anything else. You need to know where your data is coming from, what transformations are happening to it, and where it's going, and what regulations it's subject to. And as long as you have that down, then you will be able to have a very productive and fruitful conversation with a consultant or a team of consultants. And they will be able to very quickly lead you into the most productive paths. And that might be to build, or that might be to buy, depending on what your situation is. But it's going to be a unique decision for every organization.
In your experience with the consulting, where do you see companies making common mistakes or besides getting their data set up? What other things could they do as prep work to get ready for this transformation?
Permissions management is really big. because permissions management is one of the trickier parts about managing effective agents and agentic workflows, ensuring that they can only see what they're supposed to see. A lot of these preparations are just good business sense to start with. So you need to ensure the provenance of your data. Like, again, ensure that you know that everything that comes into this is accurate, because the data that you're building these systems around is going to have an outmoded impact. Organizations think that they'll just take their help desk ticket history and upload that, and they'll be able to use that to train an AI system to answer help desk ticket requests. You might be able to hypothetically do it that simply. In practice, you're going to need to have probably a small team of people pouring through that for weeks at least, to audit and edit these files, ensure that extraneous information is removed, and ensure that the responses are graded so that the models you're training off of that will know what is and is not a good response. You can just feed it all your data, but it's the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. It's just a lot sneakier when you don't see the garbage going in into these systems. It can be much harder to know how and where it's going to come out.
One thing I wanted to make sure we touched on that we've chatted about that I thought was great is context rot. So could you explain to the audience what it is, why they should look out for it, and why it's such a big failure point?
So context rot is something that's been around since people have been using generative AI. We didn't always have a term for it. Chroma just released a really good research paper and explainer video that I would recommend anybody to go check out. Um, Basically, every token that goes into a prompt or a response is a point of failure, right? Because every token has a weight to it that pulls the response in one direction or another. And if it's not explicitly leading towards the outputs that you're looking for, it's detracting from the response. And the more tokens, the greater the cumulative effect. So Claude Sonnet, by default, I know it has a bigger one available, but by default, it has a 200,000 token context window. I try to keep my operations under 70,000 tokens when I'm processing data. If it's hard to explain exactly, but when it's on a roll, sometimes I'll push that to 100,000, but much beyond 100,000, and I'm starting a new session and working from there. I don't use automatic compact. I like Dexter Horthy's purposeful compaction practice, where it's basically the human understands what is and is not important in a prompt, and the human takes the important stuff and brings it into a new chat session. But I digress. So beyond 100,000 tokens, you start to see a rapid increase in hallucinations and distractions and erroneous responses. And certain things in the training data become more pronounced. For example, Sonnet 4.5 seems to be really convinced it's still 2024. I don't know why that is, but the further into the context window you are, the more prominent that is. And so there's just these little things that keep going more and more wrong. And by the time you get to the end of the context window, it's almost always unreliable outputs that you're getting. So not every interface makes it really easy to see how much of the context window you're using. And I think that's a failure of providers. And I think that is going to improve over time as people start to become educated about what is and is not a good experience with these models. Claude Code has the /context command. Codex CLI has just the context percentage at the bottom there. So whatever interface you're using, try to understand how much of the context window you've been using. And if your chat's been going for a while, just start a new chat. You'll get better outputs. And again, watch the Chroma video called Context Rot on YouTube, 6 minutes long or so. Definitely worth your time, and pretty charts and graphs. They can explain it to pretty much anyone.
Perfect. We'll make sure it's linked down below. Kyle, this has been great. Before I let you go, is there anything you want the audience to know?
You have to be exercising your own human reasoning and judgment at all times if you're making systems with these models. There is no substitute for the human in the loop, and the human who's in the loop needs to know what they're doing in the loop for the loop to succeed. I can tell people to educate themselves, join communities, learn. This stuff's all available to you guys. There's no reason that anybody can't be an expert in this stuff in short order with the resources that are freely available to everybody today.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Kyle Clark. One thing I wanted to highlight is that Kyle and I met through the Tool Use Discord. There's a lot of great conversations there. I think you'd really enjoy it, so I encourage you to join. The invite link is down below, and I will see you next week.